very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, let me say it's quite a pleasure for me to be here. It has been an incredible weekend for me. Before this year, I didn't know about One South Carolina, and now I know a lot more. I don't know everything I need to know, but I know a lot more, and I will talk. Thank you very much. Talk about it when I go back. I really do, and Maya and Ella, I expect questions from you all as we go through, okay? So I at least have, I was telling Ella I admired her on the dance floor last night. She is, for those of you who did not get to see Ella, she's a class act. She's really, really, really a good dancer. I told her I don't dance, so, anyway. It's quite an honor for me to be here today, as I've said, and to be with my very good friend, Secretary Dick Riley. Without question, I think all of you know this, but I'll tell you, he is one of the best friends of South Carolina and American education that we've ever had. And Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you very much for your gracious introduction, and also you, Don, for just putting all this stuff together and hosting us this weekend. It's a really important reunion, I have learned as I've gone through the weekend, for the Riley Institute Diversity Leaders Initiative. I'd also like to thank Furman University President Carl Court and the Riley Institute Executive Director Don Gordon again for joining Secretary Riley in working to strengthen the ties that bind education, diversity, civic engagement, and economic progress here in South Carolina. So congratulations to all of you connected with the Diversity Institute, all of you who are alumni who are here today. Let me start with two rules, okay? I have these prepared remarks. I don't have to use them. The two rules are you can ask questions anytime you want to. There will be a question and answer period afterward, I think. But just in case, I say you can ask questions anytime you want to. I find I enjoy it more when I'm able to engage and answer questions. You probably won't get the benefit of whatever it is I have in my remarks, because you all probably want to know the same kinds of things that I love to talk about. But the things that I love to talk about all the time are not necessarily what I have here. Yesterday's sessions, as I sat and listened and then had an opportunity to participate a little bit in my little group at my table, were incredibly enlightening and inspirational to me. As I mentioned at my table, if I were to find fault with anything, it would be at NASA, we are really big on diversity. I hope everybody knows that. It is a very serious concern for us because I tell people we are the best place to work in government, and that's a fact. We have been for the last 2 years. But I also think we are the most amazing technology development agency in the world, not just in the U.S. And there are probably a lot of reasons that we could cite, but one that I cite more than anything is our emphasis on diversity and inclusion. And the inclusion part is the one that's the hardest. And so I say if I were to find fault with anything, it would be that you all don't emphasize inclusion, although you talked about it a lot yesterday, particularly the panel that talked about things that had been done wrong. And several of them, what they talked about was they had forgotten inclusion. They had forgotten to go out and ask the people who you're trying to serve. Because we frequently go in to tell people, okay, we're here to help. I'm from Washington, so I do this a lot, I'm from DC, and I'm here to help you. I don't care what you think or what you need. I have a plan. And so here it is. And we can't do that with our 18,000 NASA employees. They make things happen every single day. They know more about what we're doing than I will ever know as the NASA administrator. And so I have to depend on them to make things happen. And whenever we have issues that we want to discuss, we really try to engage them, find out what their concerns are and what they think solutions are, potential solutions. We have something that we call and this is not in my notes, I just got carried away here. We have something that we call a Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Partnership, the DISP. And I chair the Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Partnership, and what I ask our leaders to do, we have 10 NASA centers around the country. A center is like a city, for those of you who don't know. The Johnson Space Center, the Kennedy Space Center, Stennis down in Mississippi, Goddard outside of DC, Jet Propulsion Labs out in California. And each of those centers has a center director and an organization that supports that center director in running it. And as I tell people, everybody thinks about engineers and scientists at NASA. We have lawyers, doctors, nurses, accountants. Every center is like a little city. And then we have 4 big directorates through which all of our work gets done. Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate, the Science Mission Directorate, those are the 2 biggest. Those are the 2 monster directorates, and they get the bulk of our budget. And then we have a Space Technology Mission Directorate, and finally an Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate. But each of them, I ask their leaders to designate somebody in their organization who is the diversity champion. And I say, okay, the diversity champion for the agency is me. So if there's anything wrong with our diversity efforts, you know who to blame. I'm the one, because it's not getting done because I'm not paying attention to it or I'm not putting enough effort on it. Some of my center directors and some of my AAs say, look, I'm the diversity champion for my organization. But they all appoint some senior official who's the diversity champion. And then we get together periodically during the year to talk about issues. Our big issue right now is we have been emphasizing, and I think all of you know this, adding the numbers of women and minorities to the STEM fields, to the science, technology, engineering. I'm an arts person also, so I do use the term STEAM, but STEM is the going thing, so anyway. And with all of our efforts through the past, I don't know how many years, to up the number of women and minorities participating in STEM fields, what we're finding in NASA, and I think it's the same across the country, is not only have the number of women stabilized, but they're now starting to decline. So that is a very serious concern for us. So we've got to do something different than what we're doing. And I think you all are finding the same thing in your communities. You know, you mentioned it yesterday about getting back in there again and reinvigorate what's going on. Reflect on what you've done in the past, but revise it if you need to, and then reinvigorate it. This is not something that you solve. You know, I think several people said that yesterday. Diversity is not an issue that you attack, you win, and then you go off to do something else. You take up another project. We're going to be doing this for the rest of our lives. And it's because we're human beings, and human beings have personality and character and quirks, if you will. And it's probably the quirks that make our job so difficult. You know, every day you all are applying the values and skills that you honed here in this institute to break down barriers to social and economic progress in the great state of South Carolina. It's really good for me to be home. I told people that the other day. I don't get to come home very often. My mother was born not far from here, down the road in Charleston, and spent her first 8 years there. And then when she lost her mother, she became sort of an orphan, and she moved in with her aunt and uncle, who were Episcopal missionaries. And so my mother grew up traveling all over the state of South Carolina. She lived in places that some of you never heard of, like Peak and Pomeria and Jenkinsville. I know some of you say, yeah, I know those places, yeah. But those are it. Being back in South Carolina always reminds me that everything I know, everything I have been able to accomplish began right here. Everything. I was pretty mature, although I'm never mature, but I had reached a certain level of maturity long before I left to go to the United States Naval Academy and became a Marine and everything else. So I owe everything that I am to the state of South Carolina, to my mom and dad, and my church. They are the things. I think the most important thing is my mom and dad, who many of you know. Everybody knows my mom. Everybody who's a sports fan knows my dad. I have to remind people all the time that Charles F. Boden Stadium in Columbia, South Carolina is not named for me. That's my dad. But they instilled in me a passion for education. Both my parents were educators, as many of you know, and they taught me at an early age what it meant to strive for excellence and to never let anything or anybody keep me from achieving my goals. Those values were also reinforced by my South Carolina public school education, especially from several particularly inspiring teachers at W.A. Perry Junior High School and C.A. Johnson High School. I was fortunate to know and be mentored by another great South Carolinian, the late, great Dr. Ron McNair of Lake City, South Carolina, who in 1984 became the second African American to fly in space. People ask me a lot, how did you end up in this job? And I tell them I fell into it. And then I have to explain what you mean. Well, when I left Columbia, when I left C.A. Johnson to go to the Naval Academy, I didn't know very much because I didn't really know what I was going to be getting into. I had wanted to go to the Naval Academy from 7th grade, just hungered for it, and then I got there and hated it. But the two things I knew when I left town were I was not going to be a Marine. I knew when you went there, you had to serve for 5 years, and you could do it in the Navy or you could do it in the Marine Corps. I knew I was not going to be a Marine. Marines were crazy, sort of like test pilots. Marines were absolutely crazy. And I knew I was not going to fly airplanes because flying was inherently dangerous. And for those of you who, I know Burl Dakers is back there, but for those of you who knew Ethel Bolden, you knew she was not a risk taker in the sense that I take risk. And she was always worried about my brother and me taking risk. And so, flying was not healthy, and I did not want to fly airplanes. So how in the world did I end up doing what I ended up doing? When I got to the Naval Academy, as much as I hated it, in my freshman year, my plebe year, my company officer was a young man by the name of John Riley Love, who was a major in the Marine Corps, who was just like my dad. He was tough, but he was eminently fair. And I watched him, and I watched his leadership practices. And 4 years later, when it was time to graduate, and I looked back, I said, I can do anything. I want to be like him. And so I decided I would be a Marine. He was an infantry officer, so I decided I was going to go and be an infantry officer. I learned later in my 6 months of basic school, I did not like the cold. I did not like crawling around in the mud. And so I probably should not be an infantry officer. I had married the love of my life, Jackie Bolden, Jackie Walker back then. And Jackie had always said, why don't we go to Pensacola? I'm not enamored with you being a Marine in the first place, and I really don't want you to be a Marine infantry officer. And I said, I don't want to fly. And she was right. And eventually I came around and we went to Pensacola and I became a pilot. So that's how I became a Marine and a pilot. And then I met Ron McNair. I was a test pilot at Patuxent River, Maryland, and Ron had been selected in the first group of space shuttle astronauts back in 1978. And I did not know him. I had gotten to know about him by reading. And Ron came with a number of the test pilot graduates for a reunion weekend. And he and I met, talked to each other, found out we had an awful lot in common. And I hope everybody knows this. Ron, like me, was an African American. Ron grew up in the segregated South, taught himself calculus and physics in Lake City because his high school, Carver High School, did not have the subjects. And that's a story in and of itself, how he got the books. But Ron inspired me to follow in his footsteps, and he encouraged me to apply to become an astronaut by embarrassing me. When he left that weekend, or as he was leaving, he said, "Here, you're going to apply for the space program." I said, "Not on your life." And he said, "Why not? I mean, you seem like you're really interested." I said, "They never picked me." He said, "That's the dumbest thing I ever heard." He said, "How do you know? How do you know that they won't pick you if you don't even apply?" And then I was embarrassed, right? I mean, I was crushed. I felt about this big because Ethel and Charles Bolden had not taught me to worry about whether or not they'd pick me. And I was really embarrassed. And so I said, okay, I'll fill out my application. I did. And in the process of doing that, my dad passed and we lost him. So I think he had a feeling that I was probably on my way to do something different. But he died before I was selected to be an astronaut, but then I was selected subsequently in the second class of astronauts. Unfortunately, we lost Ron also in the Space Shuttle Challenger accident in 1986. But his legacy lives on through the Ron McNair Scholarship Programs, which is giving thousands of low-income, first-generation college students and minorities the chance to pursue post-baccalaureate degrees and follow their dreams. This is especially critical in the area of STEM, where African Americans and women have been historically underrepresented, and I mentioned earlier, we're still facing a problem. There's also a critical need for STEM education in rural America, and I'm pleased that the Riley Institute is leading the way in a collaboration with Knowledge Works Foundation that led to the opening of the first New Tech Network high schools in South Carolina last year. The Cougar New Tech Entrepreneurial Academy, which is a school within a school in Colleton County High School in Walterboro, and Scotts Branch High School in Somerton. With the project-based instructional approach and a heavy emphasis on STEM, these schools are preparing more of this state's young people for college and the high-tech jobs of today and tomorrow. I understand that 5 more new tech schools are scheduled to open across the state this coming fall. At least I hope so. STEM education is also at the heart of so much of what we do at NASA. Since becoming the NASA administrator in 2009, I've worked really hard with our Associate Administrator of Education, Leland Melvin, to strengthen the agency's commitment to preparing the next generation for leadership roles, particularly in science, technology, engineering, and math, or the STEM disciplines. We're committed to ensuring that every child, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, or background, has an equal chance to pursue and succeed in these fields. South Carolina is an important part of that mission. Furman, I was just talking to Dr. Court. Furman is one of more than 10 South Carolina colleges that are part of NASA's South Carolina Space Grant Consortium. The consortium is devoted to encouraging more South Carolina students, including women and minorities, to understand and participate in NASA's missions and ultimately pursue careers in aerospace industry. We also recently awarded a competitive grant to Science South and Francis Marion University to provide more hands-on science opportunities for children in underserved regions of the state. Today, I'm pleased to announce that NASA and Honeywell are bringing our FMA Live collaboration to South Carolina. FMA Live is a high-energy music and dance, got this? Okay? A high-energy music and dance-filled extravaganza that makes learning Newton's laws of physics a lot more fun than the textbook ever could. This great STEM experience will be coming to Columbia, South Carolina in April to engage students from some Department of Defense Education Association schools there. Hopefully we'll inspire some future explorers from my hometown to pursue a NASA career. NASA's partnerships with schools, universities, and communities in every corner of this country is not only about keeping our own workforce pipeline fresh and flowing, it's also about ensuring that America will have the technical expertise needed to compete and win in the 21st century global economy. We all know about the jobs crisis that has been plaguing our nation since the start of the Great Recession in 2007. But it's a little-known fact that while 12 million Americans are unemployed, more than 500,000 manufacturing jobs are unfilled right now simply because companies can't find enough trained scientists, engineers, and technicians to do the work. And I don't need to tell anybody in this room. You talked about it yesterday. I think one of the panelists mentioned the fact that you were trying to find ways to get people trained to just do technology work on the production line and the like. For those of you from the area up around Greenville, Spartanburg, if you think back, and I know Secretary Riley remembers this, the first time that Toyota came to South Carolina looking for a place to open a plant and walked away because we didn't have technically trained people. And if I remember correctly, that was when the technical colleges, like Midland Tech and all the others really got started in earnest because we realized we had to train our people to make them qualified and capable to do the jobs that were available and just waiting for us to take. All of this is occurring in a world where emerging economies are surging ahead and education has become the fault line between success and failure. Clearly, this is an American crisis, but this is one that we can solve, and you all were talking about it yesterday in many ways. Some of you are finding ways to solve it in your own community. President Obama has repeatedly stressed the importance of growing America's STEM workforce. He has set an aggressive goal of recruiting, retaining, and graduating 10,000 engineers a year to maintain America's competitive edge. And he has made historic investments to make college more affordable. Clearly, more must be done. Let me stop here for a minute. I have to say this, and I'll get in trouble. We have an incredible president who is incredibly motivated for STEM and technology development. And several of you talked about it yesterday. I sent in a question that said, hey, is the state engaged, or have you all just kissed off the state in terms of the state government? And I know we're not asking state government to come in and tell us how to do things, but there's got to be a partnership. And one of the things that's so frustrating about being in Washington today is the fact that as we propose things, really important things for this nation, even if they were proposed by others, as soon as they become an Obama program, that's it. It is dead on arrival, and we can't survive that way. You know, I think people thought that, okay, we'll wait it out. I think people really thought that we can wait it out. We'll go through this 4 years, it'll all be over, and then we'll get somebody else back in there. Yeah, we'll take the economy near crisis. We'll take it to the brink, but we can, boom, in a flash, we can make things well. Doesn't happen that way. Does not work that way. You know, when a nation loses its credit rating, that's a big deal. Now, I know there are people in big positions who don't think that's a big deal. That's a big deal, okay? So we have got to do something, and it's got to start at the grassroots level. It is not going to be solved in Washington. It's got to be solved down here. You've got to find ways to make the state work with you so that we can find ways to make the government, and the government is three pieces. I think some people in Washington forget that. Right now they think the government is President Obama and me. But the government is three parts. And you know, it's the people that come up with ideas and try to administer, and it's the legislators, the people that make policy and all that kind of stuff. And then there are the adjudicators, or the people that, when there's an argument, they come in and settle the argument between those other two branches. That is still hopefully what we teach in civics, or we teach in schools. Hopefully we teach that in South Carolina. Sometimes I wonder, because when people come to South Carolina to become a part of the government, all of a sudden they forget that there are three parts to the government, and the government becomes the president and the administration. So I apologize for that, and I hope it doesn't get me fired, but you need to know it, and it really is important. Our success lies in creating stronger alignments between schools, organizations, and institutions of higher learning, and the businesses that need STEM graduates to fill jobs and bolster American competitiveness. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, because this is what I heard yesterday. You all know this. You know this. But you can't stop, and you can't let the state government off the hook. You've got to go. You've got to make them understand that they are critical. You know, when we flow money down from the federal government, it comes into the state, and then that's where it gets distributed. And if education is not important, or not considered to be important, then a large amount of assets that could be available to you are just not going to get there, and they're going to be lost. As a government agency that's in the innovation business, NASA could not do the things we do without strong and growing STEM workforce. That's why STEM education is the foundation of NASA's Learning Initiative. In 2011 alone, our K-12 education projects reached more than 1 million students through STEM initiatives. An additional 4,000 college students benefited from our higher education projects through internships and fellowship opportunities. And we're making special efforts to bring more women and minorities into the STEM fields. At NASA, our needs for workers across aerospace in the coming decades will be great. The space program is soaring to new heights, with new destinations on the horizon and new workers needed to advance aviation and space technology. A growing number of small and medium-sized private companies are also coming aboard as the commercial space industry picks up steam, and all of them will need STEM-educated workers. This is really an exciting time in the space business. Recently, the president signed a $17.6 billion 2014 budget for NASA. I was talking to some people last night, and they said, you know, how are you doing now that you're not getting money? Let me tell you, $17.6 billion is not chump change. And if you look at our budget through the years, through the 5 years that I've been the NASA administrator, it's not good, but it's been stable. It's been at about the $17.6 billion level. And under sequester and then some other frightening things over the past year, it looked like our budget was going to go down to $16.1 billion. Now, that's a huge cut, but we're not. I mean, the Congress really gave us a vote of confidence, and in this incredibly fiscal crisis time, we've still got a $17.6 billion budget. The budget reaffirms support of the bipartisan space exploration plan agreed to by the President and Congress all the way back in 2010. It provides funding for the President's plan to return American space launches to the U.S., as well as groundbreaking scientific discoveries, game-changing technologies, and cutting-edge research into cleaner and quieter airplanes. The bill keeps NASA's deep space exploration program on track and provides funding to formulate the agency's asteroid redirect mission, an important stepping stone on the path to Mars. And that's not all. NASA science is exploring nearly every planet in our solar system and making new discoveries every day. David Brancaccio and I were talking just before I came up about our announcement this week that the Kepler Observatory now has amassed, actually, a grand total of, I think it's 715 what we call exoplanets. And these are planets that are orbiting other suns, orbiting other stars in the universe. This is not, there's only one star in our, think about this. There's only one star in our solar system, that's the sun. There are literally millions, multi-millions other suns out there. And what we're finding is that many of those suns, like ours, have planets orbiting them. Now, I told you I was a person of faith. I'm not, Reverend, I don't know whether I'm good, but I'm probably not as faithful as I used to be. I'm becoming cynical in many ways. But in my faith, whether it's a Presbyterian when I was up until the age of 12 or now an Episcopalian ever since, we learn about this thing, this omnipotent God. That's what we believe created everything. Don't know how, and I don't pretend to know how, okay? And to me, it's not important. I do believe in the Big Bang and all that stuff, and I don't know whether it went like boom, that, or like that. And that's for all my scientists to figure out. But as a man of faith, I cannot believe that a world put together by an omnipotent power, that power would have said, okay, of all these billions of systems, solar systems and thousands of galaxies and stuff, that one. That's the one place that I'm going to put something in my image. I have a hard time, as a scientist, I have a hard time with that. So I am constantly trying to find the answer to two things, and I think NASA's focused on this all the time. Two questions. How in the world did we get here? How did this stuff start for real? Genesis tells you one thing, but I believe that 7 days is not 7 days, unlike some of my more strict friends. That's all right. But we got here somehow, and so how did we do that? And the second question is, are we alone? Ella and Maya, one of these days, you may be walking on another planet. I hope you will be, because the president has told us that he wants humans on Mars in the 2030s. That's not a long way from now. I mean, think about it. That's like what, 16 years? Maya, shucks, you'll just be you'll be in college. So you'll probably go to watch Ella launch, and you'll be all giddy and excited because my sister's on the way to Mars, and she's going to be the first person to set foot on Mars, and I'm scared. And I'm really afraid for her, and you should be. But that's really going to happen. But, our technology mission directorate, for example, is developing new technologies to benefit space exploration as well as life on Earth. These include Earth-observing satellites that Secretary Riley talked about, that are helping us get better at predicting and coping with natural disasters, technologies that help us protect our firemen and emergency workers, and medical breakthroughs that are helping us understand pathogens and develop treatments for diseases. The future really looks bright for us at NASA, and it should look bright for this nation because we are you, to be quite honest. But we'll only be as successful as you are at educating, inspiring, and preparing the next generation of scientists, engineers, and explorers who will help us reach deeper into the solar system to bring greater benefits to Earth. We need your help if we are to continue to turn science fiction into science fact and make the impossible possible. Now I'm gonna finish here, but I want to tell you a story. And David, you may know this. Some of you who work in ETV or National Public Radio or that kind of stuff may know this story. How many have ever heard of Nkosi Johnson? Anybody? Can't see. I can't believe it. Nobody? Okay, Google it. Nkosi Johnson, and it's spelled Nkosi, Nkosi Johnson. I'll tell you a story. It's a very brief story because he only lived 12 years. But Nkosi was a young African boy who was born in a place called KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Nkosi was different. Everybody who knew him said. Nkosi was born with AIDS because his mother had AIDS, because his father had AIDS, and so he was on this death path before he was even born. His mother knew that she was going to die, and so she found a young white woman by the name of Gail Johnson. And she sought out Gail, and she said, Gail, you know, I'm going to die sometime, probably shortly after Nkosi's born. Would you take him and raise him for me? And Gail said, I'll do that. And so Gail Johnson, in fact, took Nkosi after his mother died. And Gail and other people say that Nkosi, from the moment he could speak, was ordering people around. You know, he's saying, we need to do this for the village, we need to do this for this, and really taking care of other people. And he knew he was sick because he was sick from birth. And he said, you know, we need to take care of these people and do this. And that's the way that Nkosi grew up. And some of you will remember back in a certain period of time, the president of Nigeria, of South Africa, did not believe in AIDS. He thought it was a myth. And so you've got this young kid and his adopted mother who are now fighting against their own president, talking about crusading against AIDS. But Nkosi caught on, and so they traveled all over South Africa. They traveled all over the African continent. Eventually, they traveled all over the world. And they were on television shows in the United States and everything. And an American writer by the name of Jim Wooten from ABC and National Public Radio heard about Nkosi, traveled to South Africa, met him, and he said he was fascinated by talking to this little kid. And he said, he asked Nkosi, why do you do what you do? And he said, Nkosi looked at him, he said, you know, I may be black, I may be poor, I may have AIDS, but in this world, we're all the same. And so Jim came back and he wrote a little book about Nkosi Johnson called We Are All the Same. It's the biography of Nkosi Johnson. It does not have a good ending for a number of reasons. One, Nkosi dies, but the other thing is the family. You know how there's family strife and stuff, and so everybody, now that Nkosi is famous, starts arguing about who gets what. So it's not a good ending in many ways. But Jim came back to the United States, started writing the book, and he got a call, and they said, hey, you need to get back, because if you want to ever see Nkosi again, now's the time, because he's going to die. And so Nkosi was now 12 years old. Jim rushed back to South Africa, said he sat at Nkosi's bedside and said Nkosi, his body was just racked with sores and pus, and he weighed 20 pounds. 12 years old, weighed 20 pounds sitting there, just skin and bone. He said, but he could see these beautiful white teeth just kind of bulging out of his black face. And he said, Nkosi was telling people, we got to go do this. We need to go do that. Got to do this. And Jim said, stop. Just stop. He said, Nkosi, you're going to die. He said, yep. He said, you could die today. Nkosi looked at him. He said, yep. Little smile on his face. He said, I don't get it. You know, you have been sick all your life. You're getting ready to die. From what I know, you have never asked for one single thing for yourself. You have never cried out in pain. Why do you do that? And he said, Nkosi looked up at him and he smiled. He said, do all you can with what you have in the time that you have in the place that you are. Do all that you can with what you have in the time that you have in the place that you are. I am convinced from yesterday that every single one of you is trying to do that. We got to try harder, to be quite honest. You know, we don't have a clue how long we have on this earth, and so we can't waste it. You know, we've got to do everything we can, and we've got to get this problem solved, and we've got to get our state to be much better than it is about taking care of our kids. We've got to be like Nkosi. We've got to take care of other people and get people in our state to understand they have to do the same. So I want to thank you for your commitment to South Carolina, to education, and to our nation. And thank you for your support and your partnership with NASA. So that's it. God bless all of you, and thank you. Thank you very much. Questions? Okay. Thank you all very much. They told me that we do have time for some questions, so I'd be glad to take them, and I'll try. Oh, there are mics. Okay. All right.
My two sons went to Keenan High School in Columbia, and had kind and many more than kind things, appreciative things to say about your parents. But two quick questions. One, does NASA have a historian among its diverse group? And two, I was also the public affairs coordinator for the Journalist in Space project, which went down with Challenger.
Yeah.
It seems to me a Journalist in Space project today would be a great thing for NASA and a great thing for the American people to better understand what NASA does.
First of all, we do have a historian, and the historian and the history office is resident at NASA headquarters in Washington, where I am, and they do a pretty good job of trying to document what we do, whether it's doing oral histories now. We've gone out and we're trying to grab people who are still around from the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo era and do oral histories with them, people in the shuttle era and everything else. In terms of the second part of your question, you know, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. Our Japanese, how many of you know about the International Space Station? I am concerned because if you don't know, everybody tells me, they give me the sad eye all the time, and they want to console me because we no longer have a human spaceflight program. Well, that's not true. We've had the International Space Station on orbit, roughly 250 miles above Earth, and it's been there for 15 years. And the International Space Station is an offshoot. You actually have to go all the way back to the Cold War. And if you look at about 1972-ish or so, when we were getting ready to phase out of the Apollo program, President Nixon, and I want to say it was Brezhnev, came together in a summit, and of all things, the two of them said, because presidents usually don't talk about space. That's way down on the totem pole. But these two said, you know, we should do something great, and we should fly in space together. And everybody went, whoa, how do we do that? You know, we've never worked together, trained together, done anything. But they began the effort to do what eventually became Apollo-Soyuz. And it was a one-time flight. The Russians launched a Soyuz spacecraft from Kazakhstan, from Baikonur. We launched an Apollo spacecraft from the Cape Canaveral, and they rendezvoused on orbit and docked and joined hands and shook and spent a couple of days in space together. And that was the beginning of our collaboration in space. And that was, Tom Stafford was the commander of the Apollo mission, and Alexei Leonov was the commander of the mission on Soyuz. If any of you watched the Olympics and you were fortunate, you may have seen the NBC expose on Apollo-Soyuz. It was right in the middle of the Olympics, and they talked about it in conjunction with the fact that the Olympic torch that was used to light the flame in Sochi had been to the International Space Station, had been out in space on a Russian spacewalk, and then had come back to Earth, and so that's what they used to light the Olympic torch. The Russians are really proud of that. I mean, it's a big deal to them, and so they really featured it. In fact, the guy who flew with me, Sergei Krikalev, was a part of the party that took the Olympic flag out and raised it at the opening ceremony and everything else. And Sergei today is the head of what's called Star City. It's the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center outside of Moscow. But kind of going back to your question, we really are trying to find more ways to tell our story. You know, we've flown teachers in space now, and they're not one-time kind of people. We actually selected a group of astronauts one year, and there were teachers in that group who were just astronauts, not teacher astronauts. And so we have had teachers selected. We've found a way to add that category of people into those who are eligible to become astronauts. We may very well fly a real journalist, and when I say real journalist, somebody who gets paid to be a journalist may actually fly in space. I think it's going to happen soon, but it probably won't be, you know, as a part of a NASA crew. It's probably going to happen with one of the commercial ventures we're doing right now. Richard Branson and Virgin Galactic probably will fly Spaceship Two, I am hoping, this coming summer. That'll be the first commercial launch into space. It won't be an orbital flight. It'll be a suborbital flight, almost like you know, we did when Alan Shepard went to space. But there'll be 5 people in Spaceship Two, and they'll go into space. It'll be about a 20-minute flight and several minutes of weightlessness. And somebody talked about perspective. I think you talked about perspective yesterday, diversity of perspective. My perspective on things is really different from anybody else's in this room, particularly when you talk about Earth, because I've seen it from a vantage point that nobody else in this room has had. So my perspective on the environment and Earth is drastically different than many of you. Now, hopefully it's in concert with most of you, but it could be drastically different. I believe in climate change. I believe we've got to take care of the atmosphere because I've seen it from outside, looking at it and looking at the devastation that has been done by something. I don't know what it is, but something. So yes, we need to work on it. But too long answer to your question. You had a question right over here, I think.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned Richard Branson. I think in 2011, 2012, Congress privatized, the legislation to privatize travel to space. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's great. Her question was, there is I think it's called the Commercial Space Act, and that opened up space to entrepreneurism, to industry, to anybody who wanted to do non-governmental activity in space. And what they said was, you know, okay, NASA, FAA, lay off. Don't bother these guys, help them, but don't make any regulations and rules and stuff that's going to stifle the development of their systems. And that's what we've done. You may not know, I talked about the International Space Station. We have been, Ella is, you said 9. Any 13-year-old kids in here? Anybody have a 13-year-old? I do. I have a 13-year-old granddaughter. The 13-year-olds, even the 13-year-olds, have never lived 1 second of their life when there hasn't been at least a Russian and an American orbiting the Earth in the International Space Station. For 13 years now, without interruption, there has been usually a 6-person crew on the International Space Station, multinational. It is a mini United Nations. I'm worried right now because of all that's going on in Ukraine. This will strain us. You know, when people wake up and realize that, hey, the United States and Russia, they're having a good time up in space right now. What do we do? So that does concern me because, you know, when you talk about bringing ambassadors back and canceling all this kind of stuff, it has a potential impact, and I worry. But we are doing everything we can to facilitate the success of commercial entities. We don't depend on any other nation to take cargo to the International Space Station anymore. We now, effective this year, have 2 American companies, Orbital Sciences and SpaceX, that carry cargo for us. They launch out of the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral, and Wallops Island, Virginia, which is the eastern shore of Virginia. If you ever come up to D.C. on a day that Orbital is going to launch, you can sit on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and you can look east and you can see a rocket go kind of arc across the Capitol Dome. That's today. That's not the future. That is today. The future, we're working right now. We have all the proposals in, and sometime next summer we're hoping to announce 1 or more companies that will replace the shuttle for carrying our crews and Soyuz for carrying our crews to the International Space Station. Can't do that soon enough. So that's going to be really, really, really important, and that'll be done commercially. NASA doesn't do access to space anymore. We depend on private industry to provide access to space. We're doing deep space exploration next fall. I mean, like next fall, okay? Mark my word, unless something dramatic, drastic, bad happens, we're going to launch Orion, which is a crew module that is the deep space exploration module. It's going to be unmanned, but we're going to launch it out of Cape Canaveral, and it's going to go into a couple of orbits of Earth and then come back and land. It is so instrumented, you cannot believe it. And it's going to tell us how, you know, is it robust enough, or is it too robust, or what? That'll be the first hint we have at its viability to carry humans to space, to deep space, because we're trying to get to an asteroid in 2025 and actually move that asteroid from its track toward Earth and put it in lunar orbit. Some of this stuff sounds like way out there. It is not. This is the future, but this is where we're going. And again, I hate to pick on Ella, but she's the closest. Ella's probably going to do some of this stuff. You know, she'll be dancing on an asteroid. I don't know. Yes.
I'm a graduate of C. Johnson High School. I tell you that.
Yep, yesterday. Gotcha.
And your mom was one of the coolest human beings I have ever met. Your dad, the stadium I played high school football in, bears your dad's name.
That's right.
I wanted to ask you another question about an extended member of your family. You mentioned Mr. Ron McNair.
Yeah.
And I was saw a picture of you holding his biography that you took for their library, which was very, very cool. I wanted to ask you, are you aware that there's a children's book out now, Ron's Big Mission?
By Carl McNair?
Yes.
Yeah, that's his brother.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. I couldn't remember the author, but it's Ron's Big Mission. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that.
Oh yeah, it's a great book. Ron has two brothers, Carl and Eric. Carl is the more prolific of the two, or the more outspoken of the two. And Carl has written a pretty good book that documents Ron's life. And I told you I wasn't going to tell you the story about Ron in the library books, but it is a really, really interesting story about life in South Carolina in the 50s and 60s, and what one young man did that changed his life, but I think actually changed the life of a lot of people in Lake City, South Carolina, because
There's a piece of animation circulating
Yeah.
online about a very particular
Yep.
incident with your representation.
Okay, story, okay. See, I'll let you all get all that information around. Was there another one? Maybe, yes. I'm sorry, back there.
I want to thank you for being here. My name is Deborah Gammas. I'm an attorney. You mentioned your parents. I have two questions for you. Some children don't have the great parents that you had, and what
Most
would you
people don't
say-
have the great parents I had.
Right.
Mine were unique.
What would you say to all of us so we can encourage those parents who don't care about their children's education, who do not care about their children's future? Because that seems to be a consistent theme in everything we address at One South Carolina. And my second question is about politics and politicians. We need more good people running for office who care about each individual and care about this country, and we're not getting that. So how can we, again, all of us, encourage people to run for office and encourage or impact those parents to do something in order to get their children to where you are?
Let me go to the politicians first, and then I'll go back to the parents. I don't, I'm a firm believer. I work with a lot of our members in the Senate and the House. I've never met anybody yet that I think wakes up in the morning saying, let me see how I can screw NASA or how I can mess up the American people. I think everybody comes there with a genuine desire to do good and to make a difference. Our shortcoming is we don't hold them accountable. We as the electorate, when you send somebody, then you've got to figure out, okay, how do we hold them accountable? And if they're not performing the way that we intended for them to perform when we sent them there, then you get rid of them, to be quite honest. And we don't do that very much. I hear a lot of people all the time that if we could just get Congress to do, and then I say, but what about your congressman? But my congressman's really good, because my congressman brings stuff back to the district or whatever else it is. We've got to hold them accountable, and all of us have to look for things that are much more broad than just our own communities. And that's hard. That is not natural. That is really not natural for somebody to say, okay, I would love to see this come to South Carolina, to Colleton County or to Richland County, but that's probably not in the best interest of the country. We don't think that way. Many other nations, people think really long term. I love, one of the reasons I think every student should take a foreign language is because when you take a foreign language, you learn the culture that goes along with that language. And many cultures in the world don't think at all about this generation. They think about generations to come. I mean, one generation away, 2 generations away, and they do things for their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they recognize that they're not going to see a thing. The good thing about working at NASA is most things that I'm working on right now, I won't see. We do long-term stuff. As excited as I am about going to an asteroid Mars, I will not be the NASA administrator when that happens. I'll be in my rocking chair, hopefully with my grandchildren around me, and I'll be saying, I was there when we started. Commercial crew and cargo. I've seen commercial cargo. That was actually started by my predecessor, and way back actually in the Bush administration, when we decided we were going to phase out the shuttle. The decision was made in 2004, okay, we're going to phase out the shuttle. We're going to go to commercially available cargo and crew transportation. But nobody did anything with it. And when President Obama came into office, one of the first things he told me was, okay, this is going to happen. Make it happen. And so we've brought about commercial cargo. We're looking to bring about commercial crew. We probably will not fly the first commercial crew to take astronauts to the International Space Station during my tenure, because right now that's scheduled for 2017. And so, you know, the president leaves office in 2016, 2017. I go with him. So, but still, I know how valuable it is. The James Webb Space Telescope is the follow-on to Hubble. It is going to, I mean, Hubble rewrote science books and continues to rewrite science books. James Webb is going to just mesmerize the scientific world, because these 715 exoplanets, JWST, if it lives up to its promise, we're going to look into the atmosphere. I mean, literally look into the atmosphere of many of these 750 planets, and we're going to be able to say, oh, it's got carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, blah, 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 blah. I mean, you know, the kind of stuff that we only dream about knowing right now. It's an incredible future, and we've just got to, all of us need to help understand and help teach our children that if they're going to be a part of it, then they've got to dream big. If there's anything we've done to our kids, we've robbed the ability of them to dream. I told you, I never dreamed of going to space, never dreamed of flying airplanes, but I read science fiction books. I was a science fiction nut. And you know, man, Buck Rogers was a big fan. I was a big fan of Buck Rogers. But Buck Rogers always went out to his spaceship, turned it on, went to Mars. It's a little harder than that. It was easier for Buck Rogers. But we are going to do that. And I want kids to think about the same kinds of things that I thought about when I was going to the Carver Theater or whatever else it was, roaming around Columbia as a kid. And we've got to get that back to them. Going back to the parents, like the members of Congress, I don't believe any parent doesn't care about their kids. You know, I really don't. I think every parent cares about their kids. I think some of them, because they don't have the capability or the wherewithal, they get really angry with themselves because they can't perform, and that anger just sometimes just gets carried through to the kid. We have to help a parent understand that, yeah, you know, there is responsibility here. We understand that you want to do something. Let us help you. I remember first time I was in Washington at NASA headquarters in the 90s, a set of grandparents took over a school outside of DC. It was right on Suitland Parkway, and it was a drug-infested school, elementary school. And the grandparents said, you know, enough. And they went in and essentially took over the school, drove the drug lords out. They made a deal with the principal that they would bring their kids to school and they would stay there all day and they would help police the school. The agreement that the principal made was, okay, if you're going to do that, you may as well make good use of your time. And so we'll let you all sit in the auditorium. We'll bring people in to teach you how to read. We'll teach you how to do math so you can do a checkbook and all this kind of stuff. So they actually brought the grandparents into the school and taught them over the course of the day while their kids were there. These weren't parents, these were grandparents, because they had kids whose kids, you know, they knew that their children wanted to take care of their kids, but they couldn't. They had given up on life for all intents and purposes. So we need to find a way to reach the parents that give us the impression that they don't care, because I think they really do. But we've got to give them some way to believe that they can make a difference, that they can re-engage. Going back to what you said, they can, you know, reflect and re-engage and reinvigorate their involvement with their own kids. They would love to do nothing more than that. A lot of times you got to get them away from whatever it is that they're dependent on. It may be drugs, maybe alcohol. It could be all kinds of things. So that's what I think we can do. Maybe, do I have time for one more question? Yeah, okay. Before Jackie gives me the hook.
Well, one of the things that's been on my mind this whole weekend, and you brought it up, of course, with politics and state politics, with the emphasis on STEM and the emphasis on education, we have a governor who turned down 148 or 168, Andy, help me, $1 million for education. And I sat here yesterday and listened to a corporation president say that they needed $umpty-ump million to continue doing a project in Greenville. Now, what can we do to get these corporations to make our governor understand that we need education money?
Ah.
And
Now-
have you asked our governor?
Yeah. Now I'll really get in trouble because this is way out of my league. But since you asked me and you asked opinion, I think business has been absent through this whole thing, and because business leaders, those of you who are in here, you really do know. You know more than anybody what is essential, what is crucial for our communities. And I think to allow, if you're a business leader in a state, look at what happened in Arizona this past week. Everything was fine, I think. When the NFL says, let's see where we can take the Super Bowl, things start happening. That's business. And that's all it is. Business leaders can step up and say, okay, can we have a private meeting? Can we go off in a back room somewhere and talk? I got other places I can do this. I need educated people. I need people who can run a lathe, who can run a robot on a production line. I can put thousands of jobs on this production line, but I can't do it if I don't have a robot who can start the production line and somebody who can operate that robot. And I think I'll go elsewhere. I could be naive, but I think it would at least begin to start people thinking, do I really want to do this? Like I said before, you can tell I'm African American. I'm very proud of that. I am upset, to be quite honest, at the way that my president, gets treated, to be quite honest. And so, if you think that we can wait another 2.5 years and then all of a sudden things will magically recover, that's not going to happen. The damage will have been done. We need to educate our kids. We need to get money into communities for high-tech stuff. We need to get money into communities for STEM education and community improvement and community development, and that money is available. And like you said, it's being turned down all too frequently. I think the only people that can do anything there are business, and they just, get together and decide, as business leaders, what are we going to do for this community? And then that's all I can hope for. So you all have been more than gracious. Thank you very much for allowing me to bend your ear and take your time, and thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.